In this video, we're going to take a look at Sailor Studio number 235. Let's jump straight to the end with my opinion on this ink. This is a very cool, dusty purple with no lack of shading. It's amazing to look at. The beauty of the Studio inks is there's a variety of richness, as in how dark or light you can get this ink just by taking a look at what they offer. So if you would prefer it to be darker or lighter, there are inks in that range. It's fantastic. Now, it is a bit pricey for the volume that you get, but I see the Studio line as very worth it to get your hands on. The shading just doesn't let you down. It is always there and always looks so good. Whether you're getting a majority of light with some dark or a majority of dark with some light, it's always stand out on the page and really amazing to look at. I'm looking at it and I love looking at my own words on the page from this ink. I hope to get this bottle, and yes, I got it as a bottle over a sample this time. I want it to last, yet the same problem I have is I keep using it, and it's going to go away kind of quickly then. I like to change things up by using a different pen each day. Today that pen is a Visconti Medici with a broad nib. It's inked up, used for a day, and used to take the notes for this video. To see how I arrived at that opinion, let's take a look at the first writing sample done on Clairfontaine. The fine nib has no feather, no spread. It has very nice shading throughout it, and while it's pretty light because this is a much drier fine that I'm using, it gives the shading is so nice. I don't know that there's a word that's not having some letters pop with it. The medium is much darker than the fine, and while it's darker, it's not losing its shading. If you look at the background and upbringing as words, you see that it gets medium tones to light tones to very dark tones to lighter tones again. It is absolutely gorgeous, and I don't have to take feathering and spread to get it because it doesn't have it. Now, the broad is lighter than the medium, just a tad bit darker than the fine, with no feather, no spread, really good shading. It's a stubby broad, but I think that helped bring out some of the character with this ink. Looking at the back of the page, we see that we get no bleeding and no ghosting, just as we would expect. To have a range of experience with this ink, all of the writing samples are done with a Sailor Pro Gear Slim Mini with a fine nib, a Pilot E95S with a medium nib, a Platinum 3776 with a broad nib. The next writing sample is done on Leuchtterm 1917 paper. The fine has no feather, no spread, very nice shading throughout, which we don't always get on this paper. The medium is much darker than the fine with no feather, no spread, really nice shading still. More mid and dark tones with only occasional light tones. Still, with this paper and it being a toned paper, it's working very well. Now, the broad is lighter than that medium, but that is a wetter medium. It's darker than the fine. It has no feather, no spread. It's still bringing shading, but not as much shading on this paper as we see with the fine or the medium. It's no feather spread. I don't remember if I just said that or I'm saying it again. But so nice, and we didn't lose a nice tone for the toned paper. Looking at the back of the page, we do see that we get plenty of ghosting, but not the end of the world. It's expected, and no bleed through. I agree with Vita. There's a lot to learn by doing multiple chromatographies. The next writing sample is done on Moleskine paper. With the fine, we have no feathering, no spread, really nice shading going on here, and it's happened a couple times with this paper. It surprises me each time because it's not known to do very well with fountain pen inks, but this is doing fantastic in how it's performing. The shading is coming through here as this looks to be much higher quality in how they're producing their paper now. Medium is a little bit darker than the fine with no feather, no spread, really nice shading going on all the way through. You look at the word life where the E gets a little bit darker than the rest of the word. He goes darker to lighter. Continued goes darker to lighter and back and forth, and it's so nice. The stub is a little bit lighter than the medium, probably a little bit lighter even than the fine. It has no feather, no spread, really nice shading throughout. This has dumbfounded me through this notebook to the point that I'm probably, if I can get it as lineless, gonna get another one just to actually have it because its performance is doing so well. When we look at the back of the page, we do see some minor ghosting, nothing to be concerned about, but we get no bleed through, which is awesome. Resistance tests are done to see how this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it may be to clean from your pen. This smear is allowed to dry for 3 days before testing it. And here we see the results of the resistance test. The next writing sample is done in a composition notebook. The fine has no feather, no spread, only a little bit of shade. There's not tons of it. If you look at the D in preferred or the TH in mathematics, you see some darker areas. The word devote goes from darker to lighter to darker. We have no feather and no spread, which we really haven't had with this paper. I do think it's losing something on this particular paper, which is just about the way that it's made. It's just not a premium brand, but it performs very well. The medium is a tad bit darker than the fine, with no feather, no spread, great shading. Your notes are going to look fantastic in your lab class, although I don't think this would really be the ink to use in lab. The stub has no feather, no spread, some shading. It is not as nice as we see with the medium or with the fine, but it is there. When you look at the word were on top, you see that it goes from lighter to darker. Or if you look at the word problems, you see a lot of color variation back and forth. So it's definitely there. It's just not as good on this paper as others. Looking at the back of the page, we see that we get some minor ghosting and no bleeding at all. With over 1,000 inks reviewed, let's take a look at some color comparables. Here is J. Herban Poissure de Lume. Here is KWZ Iron Gall Gummy Berry. Here is Noodler's Purple Heart. Here is Sailor Sweet Potato. The next writing sample is done in a Mead 5-star notebook. The fine has no feathering, no spread, always a good thing on very cheap paper. It still has shading. The shading is so strong with this ink, it shades on cheap paper. Great. Now the medium is darker than the fine with no feather, no spread, still get good shading. Look at the word to, how the T is much darker than the O. The word fine goes from a medium tone to a lighter tone to a much darker tone. Gold goes from light to dark. It looks so good. The stub has no feather, no spread, still outstanding. Just the shading, oh my goodness. It looks so good I can't believe this is cheap paper. I know thought I was about to say it's not butter, but it's not butter. It's toothy paper to write on. Looking at the back of the page, as we would expect, we get plenty of ghosting. The medium, that is much wetter, it's definitely deeper into the page, but none of this comes through and touches the back of the page. We get no bleeding whatsoever. While it's nice to compare it to other inks in the same color family, I'd prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. Here is a black ink by Schaefer, black. Here is a brown ink by KWZ, cappuccino. Here is a green ink by Ackerman, their Dutch Masters No. 2, Douze Emerald. Here is a blue-black ink by Diamine, Registrar's Blue Black. If you'd prefer different complement colors, then there's links to those different playlists down in the description. Or you can click on my face. That'll take you to my channel page. Then click on the playlist tab. Scrolling down, you'll be able to see all of the playlists that are here on the channel. The last writing sample is done on 20-pound copy paper. Looking at the fine, we have no feathering, but we do have a tiny bit of spread that's occurring. And I only know that because this is a Japanese fine and it looks a little bit more like a Japanese medium. Again, we have no feathering, which is outstanding on this paper. We still get shading with the fine nib. If you look at much, at the top of the U's or at the H, it's darker than the rest of the word. And thoughts, although I crossed the H and not the T, you see the H is darker than the T. The G gets much lighter. It's really amazing in its performance here. The medium, it's a wetter pen, and it's a much darker tone than we got with the fine. We do get some feathering all over it, a tiny consistent feathering the whole way through. It's got some spread, which isn't the end of the world, but it's here, but it still has shading. Look at how light on is compared to the word his. You see in the word hit, you see the dot of the I and the cross of the T, darker than the rest of the world. In on the top line goes lighter to darker. So very nice in what it's doing. The stub has feathering, tiny feathering the whole way through. It has a tiny bit of spread, but not the end of the world. I don't see this stopping someone from using the pen. And we still get a little bit of shading, not tons. If you look at over, it starts a little lighter, becomes a little darker. Looking at the back of the page, we do get some ghosting as would expect, and we don't get bleeding that touches the page underneath, so there's no corrupting the next page here. So what nib and pen do I think is going to give the best writing experience with this ink? It brings the shading from everything, making this a dealer's choice, without a doubt. The performance for this ink is top-notch, and you pay a top-notch price to get it. Now, my choice, if I was choosing one, is I would go with a wet medium nib, and the reason is, as much as I like the shading, I like the darker tone from this ink, to where I enjoy it dark, shading down to its lighter tones. Although, again, it still does look good even with your dry fine pens. So it's always good. It's just about the good that's best for you.